I am Erin Patten, metaphysical master in a millennial age, and it is my life's purpose to guide you and organizations along an enlightened path. So I invite you to sit comfortably and tune in as I welcome you to the MetaBusiness Millennial, where we get the real conversations you won't get in the boardroom so that we understand this is exactly the path we need to be on in order to grow, evolve, and thrive. Greetings, I am Erin Patten, also known as Master L, and welcome to the MetaBusiness Millennial. I am joined today by my beautiful friend Ines, and I have to start before I introduce her with how I even know Ines, because I almost can say that she was one of the catalyzers in getting me to now. For sure. I met her around 7 years ago when I was living in Detroit. And y'all all know my tag. I went from Harvard to healing. So she met me in between that Harvard and healing point when I was really trying to find myself. So I remember very distinctly, me coming over to her house for dinner, and we had like quiet moments together, like talking in her kitchen or something. And she'd be like, Erin, like, why are you so insecure about these things? Or like asking me just like really authentic friend like questions. And I was uncomfortable, y'all. I have to just, she don't even know this, but I just have to express like how critical she was, and just tapping in with me, checking in with on me and my emotions. She even invited me to her house because she was learning Reiki healing at the time, light healing at the time, and performed a light Reiki session with me. And I remember thinking like, wow, this is the most safe I've ever felt in the presence of a friend. And on top of all that, y'all, she's from Brazil, which is like my second home country. And that totally was a way in which I was able to connect with her when I was still doing work in between US and Brazil and trying to figure that life out. So I really am just humbled and honored that we have traveled the past several years together, still staying in close contact, still sharing books and resources around spirituality. And now we are both in our own businesses, sharing our knowledge, our wisdom, and experiences with the world. So without further ado, I want to welcome Ines, founder of the United Globe Associates, to the show and have her share a little bit more about who she is with all of our viewers and listeners.
Thank you for the introduction, Erin. And yes, I loved having you over. And that light session that I offered you is actually called Tsukyo Hikari. It's Japanese practice. I'll give you the link for you to include in the end. That's Japanese for divine light. And so I'm glad you liked it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you for clarifying. I didn't even know there was a difference between Reiki and Tsukiyomari. I didn't know that was a difference.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know enough about Reiki to compare the two. I just know that I just can tell you that it's a different practice. But yes, it was. Thank you for inviting me here. I am feeling very vulnerable, and I I didn't want to accept the invitation because I was afraid. Not afraid of you, but afraid of what can come out of my mouth. uh,
Even better.
and my coach Barbara Hewson, she says, "What is it that you're afraid of?" And that's exactly the next thing you need to do. So that's why
That's
fear and
perfect.
everything. Okay, I'm afraid of that, so I'm doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Period.
so here I am. And it's very ironic that I have experienced fear because I'm very comfortable speaking. That
Mm-hmm.
A big part of it, since I'm in the role of facilitator very often. That's I speak in public, and I lead large groups, and so I'm very comfortable. But I'm usually talking about leadership, or I am supporting someone, so, so it's just my first time talking about myself on record. So we'll see how that
Let's go.
goes.
I'm so, so excited that we get to do this. And so, with that, please share a little bit more about where you're from, like how it was you growing up in Brazil, because I know there could be some international listeners here, but for folks who have no familiarity with sort of like international living and coming to the States, I think it'd be really interesting to hear about your journey.
My first time in an airplane was at 40 days old. I was, I've been to the US. This is my third um, extended period in the US. So I came when I was a baby for my parents came here. My father came to do his fellowship, and we stayed here until I was 5, and then I returned to Brazil. And I just grew up a typical countryside uh, kind of childhood. And I would play in the street, and we would play ball, and it was just a bunch of. And I had a childhood that had like two very different sides. Like one side was very playful with my neighbors, and another side was it was in my school. Like my parents always valued a lot education, so they always paid for the best education available. And so I had the opportunity to study with the children of the most affluent kids in town. So I used to think that I was poor. After I grew up,
Everything's relative, right?
so it would be kind of like, I'm trying to think of equivalent. So it would be like, I don't know, if thinking it would be equivalent, like if you can't spend your weekend in Paris for dinner, you're poor. That would be kind of the
Right,
the equivalent.
right.
So, and same thing when I went to business school. The best business school at the time was also private, and it was very expensive. But I got into it, and my dad, he made a point that he wanted to invest in my education. So that's kind of interesting because I saw different sides of things, like uh, the experience of being poor and the experience of being rich, because I was still maybe
Mm,
in the top 5% in terms of family income for the country. And then so I and then I but one thing that happens to children who live in different cultures, who bridge different cultures. Like I was growing up with Brazilian parents in the US the first 5 years of my life. And so I learned to speak
mhm.
English before I learned to speak Portuguese, even though my mom would speak Portuguese with me. I went to school very early, so my language was English. Um, I always grew with this interest of wanting to see the world and travel the world. And so as soon as I was able to, and I had a good excuse, I left the country again, which was when I came to the US to do my MBA.
Yeah.
Um, and so I stayed, and then I worked at Motorola for a while as a project manager. And that's when, like one of the things you ask about is like what triggered, where did your spiritual journey, like a conscious spiritual awakening began.
Mhm,
It
mhm.
was I and just please stop me anytime if you have any questions. The So I was dating a guy at the time, and he was insisting that I attended this workshop. And and he would ask questions like, what is it that you want? And I would say, oh, I want this and this. And then he'd say, okay, so what's stopping you? And say, oh, because this person or this circumstance. And he would insist that there was nothing stopping me except myself, and it just didn't make sense to me at the time. This was
Mhm.
early 2000s. But then finally, there was a day that I got really upset at him. He was late
Mm.
for our date, but I just lost it.
Mhm.
And he just stayed in neutrality. He apologized, and so, but because he did not get into my drama, I could see how dramatic I was being. And and
Yes.
and then I just realized, like, how can I be experiencing so much pain because someone is late to an appointment with me?
Mm.
It was
That's so
it was
good.
so, I mean, I was experiencing so much suffering. And then I just told him, I'm just tired. Like, every relationship is like this. It's like, it's I enjoy being with the person, but then I'm in pain. I'm suffering. What do I do? He said, go to the workshop.
Period.
And I was just so pissed off because he had insisted so much, and I really wanted to be right. And and so, no, I'm not going, and that kind of thing. I didn't even know what it was, but I was sure that I was not going. Um, well, the thing is that, well, if that was going to take away my pain, I was willing to, to take the risk. So I secretly signed up
Yeah.
for the thing. Well, what it turned out to be, it was my first experience with personal development. And it was an
Yeah.
organization that doesn't even exist anymore. It was called Millennium 3. But it was basically about self-observation, self-awareness, and then when I was in, and so I just attended all their classes and then started volunteering. Uh, and I just learned a lot there. I learned about, like, how I'm bigger than my circumstances. I learned the difference between uh, ownership and victimhood. I learned to be
Mhm.
responsible, to honor my word, to be in integrity, and and being of service. Like, I remember one day I went there, and I said, "Oh, because I want." There are several roles, right? When you're doing a workshop, and I say, "Oh, because I want to do this and I want to do this, but I don't want to do this or this role." And then I remember hearing the organizer say, "You know what? You're here to be of service. If you're not going to be here to do whatever it's needed of you, then we don't need you."
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was very formative. And then when I returned to Brazil, I was fired for low performance. Total. So that's a good story in itself.
Yeah, for real.
Like, I would, when I was hired, then, my first year, I was evaluated as below expectations. Oh, no, that's normal. You just joined a very strong group. You just graduated from school and from the MBA, and everybody's a very mature project manager here. That's why, you're just starting. That's why you're low performance. That's normal. And then next year, oh, yeah, same thing. Everybody's very strong here, very mature. You're still learning. It's normal. And then next year we got, you know, managers were changed, and yeah, you're low performance. You're fired.
Interesting.
Yeah, and but it made sense because my that's not really where my heart was.
Yeah.
I think it was a very shocking experience to be low performer, or to be judged as a low performer, because I had been successful in everything that I had chosen to do in my life up to that point. And
Mm,
I was trying to apply my success, like the I would say my rules for success or my guidelines for success or my strategies, my tactics from Brazil in my job. And of course it didn't work
mm.
because like I was a Brazilian, and so my work experience, it was all Brazilian. I was hired as a local. So neither I
Yeah.
knew how to work with Americans or no other nationalities, because there were other nationalities. Neither they knew how to work with me, which is different from when you go on an expatriate assignment where actually the person gets to be trained on how to work with other people. And so I just went online to find out how to solve my problems at work, because I just was fascinated to see that there is a whole field that studies how people work cross culturally. And I just started going to conferences, and I started volunteering within Motorola to educate other people on crossing these different, how to work with different cultures. And my mentor, I remember the first time that I made like a brown bag lunch, my mentor said, you should do this for a living.
Mm.
And that's interesting because I was, just not too long before that, I had been to this workshop and I had looked at the facilitator and I said, that's the job that I want.
Nice.
And
The alignment.
yeah. And so then when I was fired, it was the perfect opportunity to start on a quest to develop the skills to be that person. So uh, for many years, I did cross cultural, and then I went to, but I couldn't work in the U.S. because of my visa was attached to the company. So I went to Brazil, and then I worked as a cross cultural facilitator in Brazil for many years, and that evolved later into diversity and later into leadership development. So it's just a lot of fun to work with leadership development in the context of like different cultures. And then I also got my coaching certification and appreciative inquiry. Just continue studying. I'm a very avid learner. Um, and then I was in my last year in the U.S., or 1 year before the last. I met my today husband. So I went to Brazil for vacation, met him at a friend's wedding, and so he decided to quit his job and come live in the U.S. with me. So the plan was that he would study English for a year, and then he would get a job here or whatever. And well, the day that I was fired was the day that he quit. Like, I called him and, hey, I have news. And he says, yes, me too. I, I just quit. I say, yeah, well, I was quit. Anyway, you don't say that, right? I was fired. It was really interesting how it was the same day. Anyway, so he came. I negotiated to stay until the end of the year with the company, and I just loved what I was doing as in the diversity. I was champion and leader of the group for diversity, so it was an awesome time. Anyway, the work that I got to do with Motorola as diversity. So I went back to Brazil, and then 7 years ago, he got invited to come to here. Like his department in Brazil was kind of relocated to here, so uh, we were relocated to be here. So that's where I am. That's a long answer to your question.
It's a beautiful answer because you really walked us through the highs and lows of what a real life is. And I feel like for many people, the assumption is, oh, you're well educated. Oh, you come from a well to do family. So your life is like a silver platter. Here it is. There it goes. It's perfect. But in reality, like there are, and you only kind of scratch the surface of the struggles, but you mean you were fired, you were, you were dealing with relationship issues, you were noticing your own inconsistencies in your ability to control your emotions over the pettiest things. And so this is what, awareness does, what consciousness does, what spirituality does is it makes you more clear on who you are and how you're treating others and especially how you're treating yourself. And so I really appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing sort of those ugly aspects because most people don't ever admit to being fired or ever admit to being because we are like these perfectionist, high performing all the time beings. Like for us to show up to a job and be told that we're not adding value, it's almost like the hugest blow to our ego. Like you might as well tell us that we ain't shit and like kick us out the door. You know what I'm saying? Like I would actually probably appreciate that more. but but that's how it feels. That's how it feels as opposed to how you were. I just wasn't a fit for that role, and actually I was a much better fit in this other role. And that took someone having to tell you that before you're able to see it for yourself. So I would like for you to like start to share a little bit more about how that awakening, if you will, started to unlock some of the other learnings that you were doing, like with the university. I think it's at Santa Monica. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes.
And some of the other programs you started to engage, because this was actually when when I was still living in Detroit and we were all in Detroit together, and you were taking some of these courses then, and it was really like strange to me. Like I had never seen anything like that before, and you were doing your best to explain it to me. But certainly this was sort of really the opener, if you will, of your metaphysical, more spiritual quest. So I would love to learn more about that, and for our listeners to hear more about that as well.
Yeah, yeah. And just before we go there, I just want to add something to the being fired experience, just to normalize it, because
Yeah,
I used to have this idea that I am my work and I am my
yeah,
results. So, if
yes,
and it served a purpose. Like I could deliver a really good job, but it would come from a place of having to prove myself, because if I don't do a good job, it means that I'm not a good person. Um, and so the it took me 2 years to admit publicly that I was fired. Like I was so embarrassed that I would say that, that I quit, kind of thing. And it was so,
trust me,
I
I
mean,
get it.
I just had so many good stories that I could use, that I use in workshops and everything, about feedback, and about people saying, "Oh, but we had great expectations of you," and I didn't have a clue of what expectations they had. Anyway,
Yeah,
so going back to your question, so when I was in Brazil, this I started attending a personal development school, like a life skills school called Insight Seminars. This one still exists, and I highly recommend it. I'll also give you the link. It's insightseminars.org, and I volunteered a lot at it, as much as I could squeeze into my schedule. And I learned that so I just started to inquire, how do these facilitators become like this? Because I am having such a transformation. Both I have experienced transformation both as a participant and even as an assistant, just being present in the room. And like, I want more of that. I want to do that for people. How do they learn it? And so A couple of things that I learned that they did. Uh, First was that they were students of Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness, msia.org, which is an organization that was founded, both Insight Seminars and MSIA, they were founded by the same guy. His name is John Roger. And so they are students of that. So, of course, I started studying that. Um, and because like insight is very secular in its language.
Yeah.
So they talk about, being your loving. Their mission is to help people awake to their loving, so transform and awaken into their loving, so that we can support the bigger awakening and uh, loving of the and transformation of the planet. But they do that
Mhm.
all. They don't talk about spirit. They don't talk about God. And I think that's very respectful, because there are lots of people who have, either who don't believe in God and spirituality, and there are others who do believe, but they have a very particular way that they want to relate to this. But
Yeah.
still, developing is growing is something that is valuable for anybody, regardless of their take on God or spirituality. So that's one thing that I started studying. And then I also learned that these facilitators attended University of Santa Monica, which at the
Mm.
time was a 2-year program. Now they have it moduled, so you can do 1 year, then another year, and so on. But at the time it was a 2-year program, like every weekend, Los Angeles, and so I was in Brazil, and it was like outrageous to travel internationally. Like, not only because it's very expensive, but also because there's something about the purchase power. So you can imagine someone doing the same thing in Brazil, they would be making at least 5 times less for the same kind of role in terms
Mm.
of purchase power.
Program.
Anyway, so it was something
Right.
completely impossible for me to go to University of Santa Monica. They have a program in spiritual psychology.
Mhm.
Spiritual psychology is the study of it's a particular segment of psychology that comes from the premise that we are souls living a human experience. So it's different from traditional psychology, and I wanted to come, but I'm very optimistic person, I would say, and I am very creative in my imagination, and so I just visualized I'm going. I don't know how, I don't know when.
Yes.
Same thing about
Yes.
the first time that I traveled that I moved to the U.S. as an adult. Ever since I was 14 years old, I was going around and researching scholarships for me to do high school in the U.S. because I knew I wanted to live abroad. That's okay. It took me 10 years, but I did it, for my MBA.
Period. Period.
So same thing with University of Santa Monica. I decided I wanted to do it, and I didn't know how, but I just put it in my vision. I have always been very and this is one thing that I have learned in these personal developments workshop. To create the vision, to cherish the vision, and to take action toward it, one tiny step at a time. But don't. So anyway, my husband got me a hand, that he got me to the US. So then it became much more affordable. And then I started, um, as soon as possible. I just started traveling to Los Angeles every month and spent a weekend there just studying spiritual psychology. So that was another big piece of my education, if you will.
Yes. I love it. And interestingly enough, when I first started my formal training, if you will, around spiritual studies, I studied with the University of Commission Sciences, which was founded by Dr. Phil Valentine, and he called the course metaphysical psychology.
Hmm.
So I'm a metaphysician in a way, and we considered it to be the study of self. So, a very similarly study of self as divine entities in a human experience. So that really was life shifting for me, as I'm sure it was for you, and for our listeners and viewers. A lot of folks are, professionals and are seekers at the same time, and are interested in understanding how to integrate the two, because in how you explain it, even in your world where you came from, like working for Motorola, you weren't having these same sort of spiritual psychology conversations or metaphysical conversations, which is why you were attracted to the University of Santa Monica. So I really would love for you to share, at what point did it become clear to you that you could integrate the two? And I know it's become newer for you to have your own practice around it, but even in your own sort of entrepreneurship, working at an organization, when did it start to feel right to integrate? Okay, I have this spiritual existence and being, and I'm also like this business leader. So how can I bring these two together, and how is that serving me? Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it goes in, it's like concentric circles. And
Yeah.
it's like, first is like the conversations with myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, when I'm going to, so I'm, when I'm going to start my day, and then when I'm going to start any important block of time within my day, like, okay, there's this special project that I'm going to dedicate an hour or 2 hours or whatever. And then I just sit in silence, and it's like, uh, instead of going to like, what is it that I want, or what will get me more visibility, and it's like, okay, how may I be of service? And just having this
Mm.
higher uh, wisdom come through.
Yes.
And so it goes,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like my staff meeting happens at 6 a.m. when I'm doing my meditation.
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah.
in which I do a particular kind of meditation called spiritual exercises from MSIA, which alternates chanting and listening. But it's amazing how my instructions, these are the people that you need to contact. These are the things that you need to do. It's like, why do I need to contact such and such? I don't want to talk with such and such. It's like, don't argue, just do it. And then I do it, and I'm
Mm.
like, oh, this is why I needed to contact this person. So it's having this, um, and then when having this ability to sit in silence and let the small voice within talk. And then I say it's concentric circles, because then it goes out to the people that I relate to. And I think there's a lot of tact to be exercised, and observation, to see how much people can take.
Yes.
So think of a light bulb. Let's say that I am emitting light at 100 watts. If someone is used to light at 10 watts, and I come at him and I say, hey, look at this, how wonderful this, joyous, blissful experience of being one with God. And it's like, what? It's like, I'm totally going to blind, and I'm inflicting. And I think this is something that is very common in the process of awakening, which is, it's so cool that I want to share it with everybody. And in this enthusiasm of wanting to share, I'm inflicting myself on others. Oh,
Yes.
and so I remember my husband telling me that, how much that I think that I know better than him. Like, oh, you found this holy grail, and then you think that I want to drink of it. It's like, I don't want your Kool-Aid. kind of thing. So just like see how much is a, and so for that, I screen the language. What is the language that the person uses? And then I do my best to meet them where they are. And so if
Yes.
the person is emitting a 10-watt light bulb, I might come in as 15, 20 and say, "Oh, yeah, that is a possibility." And they do experience awakening as someone that is I'm extending a hand for the person to grab, but they're grabbing it. I'm not yanking them. And at the same time, I'm staying humble in a beginner's mind so that I am looking up to who has a 200-watt bulb for me to hold their hand.
Yes.
And so it's like a, um, I don't know, we're just giving hands to one another and just pulling each other up in the awakening process.
Yeah, I love that. And, I just want to highlight a couple things before I ask you to dig a little bit deeper because one thing you said that the first question you asked yourself was, how can I serve? And I felt like that was really beautiful because oftentimes in this self work, people kind of misconstrue the self love and the put yourself first with being selfish. And I just allow people to, have that thought because it is a different frame of thinking in terms of how we're generally used to orienting ourselves around the world. And interestingly enough, as we're focusing on self and doing that self work, it is in service to humanity because, as we shift, as we heal, as we grow, as we learn how to speak to others and see others differently, that's serving in many ways versus kind of operating like how I can say I definitely was like a bull in a china shop. Like I was that 100-watt bulb just bright light shining, blinding people all over the place and breaking things in the process. And that's not service, you know? That's damage, that's destruction. And so that to me was a really beautiful statement that you made in addition to in how can I serve at what capacity can I serve, this particular individual. And that's what you meant in terms of I love the light bulb analogy and reference because not only are you orienting yourself towards growth and service, but also with the awareness and the mindfulness, the empathy and the compassion to see, okay, where does this person sit right now and how can I sit alongside them and not stand up next to them or stand over them. In the process I want to just be right along with them, walking side by side. So I think that's really beautiful approach. And I would love if you could point to a specific example, particularly in business, where this mindset or this orientation, or even in your marriage, like I loved how you it brought up your husband because this is business and personal to me, it's the same thing. Like managing a relationship, managing a partnership in business, it all requires the same skills in many ways. So could you share a little bit more if you could a personal story or of challenge or triumph as you were starting to come into your awakening or as you are moving in your awakening?
Personal story integrating in the business, you mean integrating like spiritual and
Or in your marriage or in your friendships, integrating sort of the learnings you've had and navigating the challenges or the conflicts.
okay, I think I can give an example. My coach Kemen Samuel, and I'll give the link for for both my coaches, both Barbara Hewson and Kevin Samuel. She busted my ass. Am I on? Is it okay to say falling?
Yeah, girl, I cuss all the time on here. Yeah, oh yeah, yeah,
She, I heard her say to my face, "So you think that making money is not spiritual?" And she nailed it. So I have built a very successful career in every criteria that I chose to succeed on. And for me to not succeed financially, in other worlds, like to not make them out the kind of money that I was making in corporate, to me, that was success. That was me being right, because I was spiritual and I don't need and I don't want the money. And I think you're talking about like bringing the spiritual and the material together. I think actually that is the critical point for business right now in our generation, to make business successful. Because what happened is that we have progressed so much materially that we exploited the planet, and we 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 have been uh, damaging the planet. We have people starving. We have trash everywhere, pollution, and in the name of material, like this is a material civilization. And then there are people like me who do have who chose to awake and who chose to be conscious, but then I deny the material. And I think the power is, um, like, a woman that I think that got this. Her name is uh, Lauren, Laureen Paulo Jobs. She founded Emerson Collective, and she's someone who got this. Like, we need to bring together venture capitalism, philanthropy, and we need to create a new kind of business. Just we need, because it's like so that everyone grows and flourishes. And um, so actually, I would love to meet her. So that's my shout out
yeah.
for support. If anyone knows her personally and can make an introduction, I would love to be involved with this, serve this woman in whatever capacity, and serve this woman in her organization, because I really believe that in and it's like being selfish. It's kind of like we have our higher self and our lower self, which is also called ego. And we have, and the lower self, the ego, has desires. And I think it's not a matter of ignoring, but it's like directing them in a positive way.
Yes,
So yes, I want to grow. Yes, I
yes,
want to have material comfort. But how can I do that in a way that everybody wins? I was just
yes,
watching a movie yesterday called Margin Call, and it just illustrates 24 hours in one fictitious, quote unquote, organization, investment bank, just before a financial crisis. But it illustrates so well how, how the being selfish was not of service. But we can operate in different ways. Like, for I loved the movie Avatar. And so there is this scientist who She just felt this human scientist who was studying the new planet and those people, and she could reconcile those two things, the magical. And anyway, so, but you asked for an example. I mean, does my relationship to the material answer your example?
You brought up a whole new question for me, actually, because that is fundamentally what meta business means. And I'm not even quite sure if I have expressed it or explained it enough on this podcast. Is that meta stands for metaphysical, and business, obviously, the core tenets of profits and profitability and efficiencies and things like that, yet integrating very intentionally the metaphysical principles of the universe, of the things that are aligned with our goodness, with our being of service to humanity, of being in connection to our divine, our higher selves. And, I'm so grateful that you brought up this woman who also does this as her, career and a core tenet of what she does, because this is fundamentally, why I started this cast, is to have more of these conversations around how can business shift such that the primary outcomes aren't necessarily defined solely by money. And it's a great metric, and it's a great mode and method of communication, yet we are also divine beings having a human experience. And how can we integrate more of that energy into what we're doing? We're giving so much of our time and our lives to business. How can it be infused with all this energy that I believe is just lying dormant because we're really just operating in such a box, if you will, the 3D box, when we could be operating in a 5D, toroidal, or 9D. We could be operating it in such greater capacities using our divinity.
And we are at the dawn of a spiritual civilization. And I think that business has a very important role to play, because business know how to make stuff done. So
Very much
the
so.
same way that we messed up and dirtied the planet, we can clean it up. And there is enough food to feed everyone in the planet. It's not that we don't have enough resources. We do have the resources.
It's the allocation and management of the resources that's the challenge.
Exactly. And I think that goes into, and so it goes, I think it goes through bringing a concept that is very spiritual, which is the concept of oneness. Like we are all one,
Mm-hmm.
bringing that down to the ground level. Well, if we apply we are all one, then the moment that I am deciding if I am buying a certain product, and that goes even in our behaviors as consumers. The moment that I'm deciding if
Mm-hmm.
I am going to buy that product, where is that made? Who made this? Is there
Mm-hmm.
someone who's starving in a slave like relationship to make this thing so cheap so that I can buy it?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
am I supporting that? So it's kind of like looking through the
Mm-hmm.
supply chain. And
Mm-hmm.
um, there's a pretty good book on this topic called Capitalism on Fire. So
Mm.
if anyone is interested, like how the blindness of the veil of blindness is starting to be lifted, because and we have
Mm-hmm.
power as consumers, as investors, for example. Am I willing, when my investment consultant, he was sharing some options of things that to invest in that fit my profile. And well, I am looking, is how is this company treating their employees? How's this company treating the communities where they operate? And are they clean in their operation? And it has to be, and it has, and more important than what the organizations do, is like, where are they coming from? What is your inner,
What's the
what
intention?
is your innermost attitude? And am I
Right.
doing this to look good? Or am I doing this because I really think it's the right thing to do? And it goes
Right.
back to me as an individual. Remember that earlier I mentioned, oh, when I sit with myself, it was my own training, and to start, instead of asking, okay, what is it that I'm going to do that it's going to make me look good, is like, how may I be of service?
Hmm.
So same thing in the organization. It's like, am I doing this to be of service? Am I thinking bigger, am I thinking as we're all one? Or am I doing this just to greenwash, just to look good in some rating?
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, what you're talking about purely is intention. And that is oftentimes fueled by our desires, by our ego. And that you brought up so beautifully earlier in the conversation, because I hear people talk a lot about ego death. And I don't really ascribe to that, because you can't really kill yourself like that. You can't kill yourself unless you kill yourself, and you still can't kill yourself. Okay. you know and with the ego, it's really about bringing that mind, that desire mind, into balance. And that balance was coming up a lot for me as you were talking about utilizing the business structures, the business organization, the business tools to shift what's happening here on the planet. It's about bringing more of a balance to how we're already existing, because we're far on this extreme, and we need to be more over here. But to get there, it just requires a little bit more of a balance. And a lot of the work that I do in my Tai Chi is about embracing desires, like first noticing them, naming them, and then nurturing, which the nurturing is really like embracing. Like nurture is like embrace, and to hug, to love. Because when we're aware, first of all, that our intentions may not be pure, and when I say pure, like they may not be coming from the best place. Like I may be out for greed, I may be out for some recognition, I may be out for a little bit of control, I may be out here because I feel unsafe, insecurity. So when we're able to notice how am I, and why am I moving this way, and naming, okay, I'm moving this way out of fear, which is a lot of how business is driven: fear based, competition based, outcome based. And then we're able to really nurture it and bring that into balance. So I'm really grateful that you lifted that up, because these are processes and healing processes, especially, that we could utilize to better make decisions to for our businesses, for our personal lives, for our family lives. So that really resonates deeply with me.
And also, like, the ego is like a dog. It makes a great servant, but a terrible master. So I want to
Hmm.
educate my ego so that it follows me. It follows my higher consciousness. It follows my conscious self, and calmly, rather than, you, you probably seen, those people in the street that the dog is all wild and barking and pulling the person. And that's when I allow my ego to take over. And and that's where all the stress comes from and all that kind of thing. So even another way, just going back to your question of like, how do we bring together spiritual and business, in the way the way that I relate to the other person is a reflection to how I relate with myself. So first, look and be conscious about the relationship that I have with myself. Am I loving of myself? Am I accepting myself? Do I have a learning orientation to life, or am I beating myself up for the mistakes that I made? And then when relating to the other person, am I being loving and I'm being accepting? and which doesn't mean being permissive, because establishing boundaries and holding boundaries and calling people on their shit, that's also loving. And we can do that in a loving
Yes.
way rather than in a
Yes.
harsh way. And most people go to work to be reparented. You know, work is a place of belonging. And then I tend to replicate in my relationships, both at home and at work or school, wherever I am, I tend to replicate the patterns that I have lived in the past, especially the
Yes, that's
patterns
so good.
that need healing, because that's my
Yes.
higher consciousness bringing to me an opportunity. It just repeats. It's Groundhog Day, right? It's the movie Groundhog Day. It just keeps repeating
Yes.
until I change inside. Outer experience is a reflection of inner reality. That's one of the principles of spiritual psychology. So if I have turmoil inside of me, that's what I'm going to experience at work. So, and then often people think that the solution is to numb it. So, how do I numb it? There are the socially accepted ways like eating, shopping, taking meds. And then there are others that have more uh, serious consequences like alcohol or drugs. But it's like, I remember someone in a workshop we had. We were practicing just breathing exercise, because meditation, it was like way too much, right? Just breathing exercise, just being quiet for a few moments. She just couldn't bear the level of anxiety that she would experience when she was quiet. And so her way of dealing with her anxiety was to just work, 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 overwork. And and so it's like, just be with whatever is present. Sometimes we don't need to do anything. Just be with it.
Yeah. I love it. I love that. And I just this is a great kind of closure, I believe, to a very healing conversation around work. And one thing I just want to amplify in what you just shared was around the parenting and how we go to work to get reparented. That fundamentally has to change. For us to evolve in this new age, we must become self managers. I truly believe in the idea of the management of self, and moving to and through work and to and through life, because we cannot continually rely, over reliance at this stage, on leaders, on managers, on other people to guide us and shepherd us into the way, because it's not anyone's responsibility for our success or for our failures. There's no more blame that can be placed. It's all on the self. And so that really deeply resonates with me around going to work to show up for self as opposed to going to work to show up for someone else. And I know that's not really how it's structured these days, even with you in your evaluations, performances. We're always trying to show off, for the master, if you will. But at the end of the day, we have to be able to show up and show off for ourselves. So, and to your point, that takes stillness, that takes a little bit of quietness, it takes a little bit of listening to yourself, and that really deeply, you know, hits me in my heart chakra a lot. So, thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so for folks who are listening and watching and who want to reach out to you and work with you or just chat with you, can you share with them how they can get in touch with you?
Yes, my website has my contact information, so you can go there. It's www.appreciative www.appreciative.me. So that's APPRECIATE dot M as in Mary, E as in Echo, and they can find there my my contact information and my LinkedIn as well.
Perfect. And what are you offering right now? Is it coaching, strategy, just a couple of your offerings and people can know how to tap in?
Yeah, it's both facilitation and coaching, and I also work with projects that have more coaches and more facilitators as a team. So there's sometimes uh, I work individually. Sometimes I work with groups,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes it's by myself,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes I am working with I'm partnering with other facilitators and coaches, or I'm also facilitating partnering with a consulting company.
I love that. That's good to know. And I just want to thank you again for sharing your life, sharing your story, sharing your wisdom with all of us, especially with me, and your time. And for all of those, again, check out Ines. She's a beautiful soul, a bright light, and also a great business mind for those of you looking to co create with her. And for all of those that are interested in learning more about the Meta Business Millennial podcast, you can catch me on Instagram and social media channels, my YouTube channel at I am Erin Patten. There are more resources. You can check the show notes for this episode and more at themetabusiness.world. We love you all so much. Peace. Did you really love this episode of the Meta Business Millennial podcast? Well, I am honored, and I appreciate you subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing it with your friends, because your feedback allows us to co-create more enlightened conversations. And if you're interested in growing your soul now, head over to my website, erinpatten.com, to find all the show notes, links, and free resources to get your energy activated today. In the meantime, stay bright, my friends. Much love and light. Peace.